there is a lot of evidence to suggest that user-generated reviews are important. There's statistics, something like 75% of people check user reviews before they undertake travel. Lots of people rely on reviews for things like purchasing cars. A lot of user data suggests that user reviews are important. There is some research that kind of tries to directly measure the effect of user reviews on sales. I actually have a previous paper with Dina Maisland that looks at that, and we find significant evidence that user reviews drive sales in the book space. But there's evidence from other sectors as well. If people are going to rely on reviews, they clearly want them to be genuine. And I think there's two bad effects of having fake reviews kind of tainting the review pool. One is people might make a decision that they wouldn't have otherwise made. They thought this was a nice hotel, but the reviews were fake, and it turns out not to be a nice hotel. I also just think that it's a problem if people suspect the reviews are fake because they'd like to be able to rely on them. I'd like to feel comfortable making this decision. And if I don't trust the reviews, I may be hesitant to buy. I may be hesitant to make a decision. There is a vast computer science literature on the topic of using linguistic markers and other markers of fake reviews. And A, that's not particularly our expertise. And B, we understand that these markers there's a little bit of an arms race, right? In that if people understand that reviews with a certain characteristic tend to be fake, fakers have an incentive to invent around that characteristic. And so we wanted to go to the question of economic motivations to post fake reviews and kind of bypass these issues of linguistic markers of fake reviews. We started out with this idea of who has an incentive to post fake reviews. And actually we were interested in these incentive issues in and of itself, right? So companies have an incentive to post reviews about themselves. Companies also might have or a manager might have an incentive to post a review about a rival. Because nearby hotels are clearly substitutes for one another. So we started out with this idea of incentives, and we really approached it from the question of, is there evidence that those who have an incentive to post fake reviews post fake reviews? We looked at TripAdvisor and Expedia in the main part of the paper, and an important difference between TripAdvisor and Expedia is that TripAdvisor allows anyone to post a review, which has some nice features. There's tons of reviews on TripAdvisor. And Expedia only allows you to post a review if you have booked a night and stayed at the hotel through Expedia. So if I'm posting a fake review, especially if I don't want to be caught, right? I probably don't want to have my credit card information. It is costlier to post a fake review at Expedia than it is at TripAdvisor. So we started out with the premise that a higher fraction of the reviews at TripAdvisor are likely to be fraudulent than they are at Expedia. And then we undertook a methodology in which we examined the difference between TripAdvisor and Expedia reviews as a function of the ownership structure of the hotel and the ownership structure of the hotel's neighbors. Right, so this is where it gets a little bit complicated. So one of the things we talk about in the paper is reasons why we think that independent owner-operated hotels are more likely to post fake reviews than hotels that are part of a large chain or a large ownership structure. And one of the things we really focus on in the paper is neighbors. So if I'm a hotel and my neighbor is an owner-operated independent hotel, do I have more one-star reviews at my hotel on TripAdvisor relative to Expedia? So the idea is I'm looking at the difference between the site where we think the reviews are mostly reliable and the site where we worry about fraud. So TripAdvisor versus Expedia. And then hotels the difference between hotels whose neighbors have a high incentive to post fake reviews and hotels whose neighbors don't. And we find that hotels whose neighbors are independents or whose neighbors are single owner operator, if you're located next door to such a hotel, you have more ones on TripAdvisor, ones and twos on TripAdvisor relative to Expedia. So you look worse on TripAdvisor relative to Expedia. It's a little hard to benchmark overall. I mean, there could be other sources of fake reviews than the ones that we identify. I mean, we think that certainly south of 10% of the reviews are fake, right? So the majority of the reviews are accurate, I think, or at least real. Maybe they're not accurate. They don't necessarily accord with what your experience would be, but they're real. So something south of 10%. It's not honest and it's illegal. We talk a little bit about legal ramifications in the paper, so it's a bad thing. I'm certainly not encouraging it. I mean, in this paper, we don't have evidence of hotel sales. We have evidence on sales in other places, but my best guess is, based on what I know about the industry and the mechanisms, I think it's probably likely to be effective. That a one-star review of a hotel is actually probably a powerful deterrent for people to stay there. And so if I post a negative review of my neighbor, it probably does drive some business to me. I think we've seen over the last few years just an explosion of different models of ways in which companies use reviews and the way in which they generate review platforms. And different companies have adopted different strategies, and you can see why. So, for example, I was recently looking at a clothing site where they have a separate review, which is, I'm just going to tell you whether I like it or not based on the picture, and then another set of reviews only from people who have actually bought it, right? And those are telling different things, and you can imagine for that kind of site, they want to separate that and highlight it. A lot of sites are allowing users to add more than just textual content, right? So pictures have become a big deal in a lot of sites, which I think, can be informative or entertaining. So that seems to be an interesting thing. But I think the platforms that are really in the business of reviews have made real efforts to differentiate themselves along some of the lines that we've discussed. So Hotels.com now has a big advertising campaign where one of the things they advertise is, we insist that our reviewers stay at the hotel. No fake reviews on Hotels.com. They think that's an important enough issue that it's featured in their national ads. So I think there's really a wide variety of business models being experimented with. And it's probably too soon to say this is the right one, and I'm not even sure there is a right one. I think for specific commerce sites in specific niches, different kinds of review platforms are going to make sense. One thing that we have seen is some effort to link reviewing with social media. So this is actually TripAdvisor has been doing this. So I can see where my friends and friends of friends reviewed. I think those efforts haven't yet achieved a lot of density, but I do think this idea of linking with social media is a way of providing a layer of trust. It has a downside in that, maybe I wouldn't be as frank in a review if I thought my friends were going to read it and it was going to be identified with me under certain circumstances. But it's certainly a mechanism for promoting trust that some of the reviewing sites are experimenting with.